She stood by the edge of the creek, droplets of water cascading down her face as she vigorously wiped them away with her hands. Frustration bubbled up inside her as she sighed. "Oh, just great," she muttered to herself, the sun glinting off the surface of the water and the sound of the gentle current echoing in the tranquil surroundings. Meanwhile, Blake carefully guided the horses away from the expansive open field, leading them back towards the enclosed gate where they would tend to the horses' shoes. The sun cast a warm glow over the scene as the dust filled the air when Mary came sprinting towards him, her face flushed with urgency. "Blake, I promise he isn't my brother," she exclaimed, her voice laced with both exasperation and sincerity. Her face noticeably filled with anger. Blake raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk tugging at the corners of his lips as he took in the chaos of the twins' latest argument. "What now?" he asked, genuinely amused by their antics. "Oh, he's really crossed the line this time. He sent Elizabeth off to Willow's Creek, a place she hardly knows." Lizzie's voice filled with concern as she spoke. "It can be dangerous if you're not familiar with the area. He said she hasn't come back. I'm sure she's okay." "Where's Dad?" Blake asked, his voice tinged with a slight sense of worry. As he spoke, he wiped the dirt and mingled sweat from his forehead with the edge of his sash, trying to clear his vision. The oppressive afternoon heat had soaked the hair at the back of his neck, leaving it damp and clinging, a reminder of the labor they had faced. He shifted his stance, scanning the horizon for any sign of his father, hoping to quell the unease building within her. "He's with Malvin out in the wheat fields," his sister replied, her brow furrowing with concern. Blake took a deep breath, steeling himself before he walked outside the fence. He carefully gated the wooden fence and closed it with a soft click behind him, the sound momentarily breaking the stillness of the afternoon. "All right," he said, placing a reassuring hand on his sister's shoulder, feeling the tightness of her nerves. "How long ago did she leave?" "He told me. He isn't sure, sometime this morning," she replied, glancing up at her brother. "This morning?" Blake echoed, shock spreading across his face. "Damn, you should have mentioned that sooner," he added. "I'll grab my horse," Blake said as he hurried to the barn. Lizzie struggled to prop herself up, but as she shifted her weight, a sudden searing pain jolted through her ankle, causing her to wince involuntarily. The sharp sensation made it abundantly clear that standing was not in the cards for her at that moment. With a deep breath, she turned her body gently, settling down onto her hands and knees in the shallow creek. The cool water rushed around her, and she could feel the rough, gritty texture of the tiny rocks pressing against her palms and knees. A flicker of humor sparked within her as she surveyed her surroundings. "Oh, this is definitely where pants would come in handy," she mused to herself, a wry smile creeping onto her lips despite the discomfort pulsing in her ankle. The absurdity of the situation, sitting half-submerged in a babbling creek, with nothing but her torn skirt to shield her from the chill, was enough to lighten her mood slightly, even if just for a moment. From her precarious position, she slowly and deliberately rose to her feet, mindful of each movement to avoid placing any weight on her injured ankle. Her brow wrinkled in concentration as she carefully adjusted her posture, ensuring that she maintained her balance while wincing at the dull ache that throbbed beneath her skin. "Things aren't so bad," she reassured herself, trying to find a glimmer of hope in her difficult situation. "Oh, when I finally escape this mess, that boy will have to answer to me," she declared with determination, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling around her. "To be honest, I wasn't paying attention to where I was heading," she considered just as swiftly. She began the daunting ascent from the trench that had ensnared her. "Surely there must be an easier way out," she mused, her voice barely rising above the murmur of the creek. With determination in her heart, surveying the surroundings for a more favorable path to freedom, she carefully lowered herself, wincing as she struggled to find stable footing on the uneven terrain. Her injured ankle throbbed, making each small movement a challenge, and the dry earth crumbled beneath her fingers, offering little support. She gazed thoughtfully at the shimmering creek, its waters dancing playfully over smooth stones, and the surrounding trees swayed gently in the warm breeze. With a playful smile, she remarked, "You know, I could really see myself making a home here."
I wouldn't rely on that, a voice spoke from above. Lizzie whirled around in surprise to find Blake crouched down, staring at her. She almost forgot the condition of her ankle.
"Why not?" she inquired of Blake, her interest aroused as she anticipated his answer, all while attempting to conceal the joy she felt at the sight of someone familiar.
"Well," he began, choosing his words carefully as he navigated the rugged, uneven dirt trail that led down into the sparkling creek below. "The way I see it, far too many wild animals are drawn to this creek," he remarked, his boots making a hard splash as they plunged into the cool water.
Lizzie glanced around. To be truthful, that thought never entered her mind. Blake couldn't help but smile as he noticed the tension etched on Lizzie's face. Her brow creased with concern, and he could see the uncertainty in her eyes.
"You're safe," he reassured her, stepping closer, his gaze fixed on her drenched face and the strands of hair clinging to her skin.
She managed to smile. "Thank you, Blake, is it?" she inquired, her voice soft despite the circumstances.
Blake slightly impressed. "You're good with names," he replied, a hint of admiration in his tone. "I would have thought it would take you a few days to remember all of us."
Well, she began to speak. With an effortless, fluid motion, he bent down and swiftly lifted her into his arms. The suddenness of the action caught Lizzie off guard, and a warm flush crept across her cheeks. He continued down the creek because he was familiar with a simpler path upward. "I could have tried to walk," she said, her voice slightly strained as she shifted uncomfortably in his embrace. "It would have taken longer. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to go home," Blake declared with a sense of urgency, his tone firm and resolute. "Home?" she whispered silently, her mind heavy. She realized it still didn't feel like home. It was just another place, a transient stop where she felt trapped by circumstance. Each night brought with it an overwhelming sense of dread, shadows lurking in the corners of her thoughts, far from the comforting embrace she longed for. What awaited her in the darkness was a far cry from anything she could ever look forward to. "Lizzie," Blake said gently, his voice barely a whisper, as he observed the distant look in her eyes, as if she were lost in her thoughts. His voice calling her name shattered her daydream, pulling her back to reality. "What did you say?" she asked in confusion as she turned to look at him. "I'm sorry," he replied, a hint of embarrassment creeping into his tone. "It just slipped out." It's a bad habit of shortening people's names. In an attempt to shift the focus away from his blunder, he quickly pointed ahead. "Look, we're here," he said as they approached the majestic horse that stood patiently, his coat shining in the sunlight. She hadn't heard the name Lizzie in ages. It was a name she had always preferred to the more formal Elizabeth, evoking a sense of warmth and familiarity. When he spoke her name, she was struck by a wave of nostalgia. The sound hung in the air like a distant memory, making her question whether this moment was real. He effortlessly lifted her back onto the horse, again demonstrating his impressive strength. As she adjusted in the saddle, a brief curiosity about the extent of his abilities crossed her mind. "I'm starting to feel like a sack of potatoes," she murmured, the thought escaping her lips before she could catch it. The sentiment hung in the air, a mixture of resignation and humor. Blake couldn't help but chuckle softly at her remark. With a practiced effort, he hoisted himself onto the back of his horse, the creature shifting and snorting beneath him as it adjusted to his weight. "I understand, my friend," he murmured softly to the horse, his hand reaching past Lizzie to tenderly stroke the creature's sleek neck. His fingers brushed against the soft fur, and he secured his grip on the reins as he felt the steady warmth of the horse beneath his palm. With a gentle nudge of his knees, Blake urged the horse forward, his body swaying in harmony with the rhythmic movement of the animal. He flicked the reins with a practiced hand, gently coaxing it into a smooth, graceful stride. The ride home enveloped Lizzie in a comforting embrace, the rhythmic sway of the horse beneath her sending her into a gentle state of relaxation. After the long day she had endured, fatigue washed over her like a warm blanket, and she found herself battling the heaviness of her eyelids. They fluttered closed, the world around her fading into a soothing blur, only reopening when the horse's gait grew too bumpy for her drowsy state. Keenly aware of her struggle against slumber, Blake glanced down at her. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he marveled at her ability to drift off mid-ride. With a subtle shift, he slowed the horse, allowing her to rest easier, cherishing the simple yet endearing moment of watching her succumb to the soft lull of the journey. Her head slowly fell on his arm. Going at this pace would take longer to reach the house, but he didn't mind as they weren't far. Blake noticed the dampness of her clothes gradually soaking through to the front of his shirt as the ride continued. They might have caught a cold if it weren't still summer. His thoughts drifted as he savored the horseback ride, taking in the fields that he passed. In the blink of an eye, they reached home,